On a late summer evening in August 2022, the streets of Merseyside bathed in warm summer air. Regulars at the Dovecote Labour Club got the last drinks orders in after watching the Monday night football on the TV, Liverpool FC having fallen to a 2-1 defeat to Manchester United along the M62 at Old Trafford. Joseph Nee was also watching with two friends, local men Timmy Naylor and Paul Abraham. The men were in good spirits, having enjoyed the match in each other's company. Local woman Cheryl Korbel had been out for tea at a local restaurant on Queen's Drive with her 9-year-old daughter Olivia, a treat since the school holidays would soon end. Shortly after they returned home, it was arranged that the neighbours would come round for a cup of tea. The door was left on the latch while she put the kettle on. Olivia, the youngest of her 3 children, had gone to bed but was restless due to the heat of the summer's night, an unusual but not unwelcome problem to have in typically cold England. Little did they know that only metres away a masked gunman had been lurking and lying in wait, armed with a glock and a revolver for the past half hour, ready to pounce at the moment that Joseph Nee emerged on the street. August 22nd, 2022 would prove to be anything but ordinary. It would instead become one of the darkest days in this city's history. You are watching OCG TV. Chapter 1. The Buildup. Thomas Cashman had spent much of the day patrolling the Dovecote area. It wasn't unusual for him to flit around various addresses of friends and family throughout the day. After all, he hadn't had an official job in several years. His half-brother lived just off Kingsheath Avenue on Finch Lane, but his interest was solely over the road in Joseph Nee. Nee was a convicted burglar and drug dealer not long out of prison. It hasn't been publicly confirmed as to why Cashman wanted to take him out, but the view of some in the underworld was that Nee had allegedly, and possibly unknowingly, tried to rob Cashman. Cashman admitted in court that he was a high-level cannabis dealer who had his own grows, the term given to large-scale cannabis plant growing, often taking place in houses or industrial spaces, while Nee was known in the underworld for having burgled rivals. During that fateful day, Nee was with his friend Tim Naylor. His Volkswagen Transporter van had been spotted parked nearby. After some time, they drove to Aintree Retail Park where Mr. Naylor purchased a couple of high-value electrical items before Nee drove him home and helped him to set up his new purchases. It was at this time that Cashman passed by the address in his own vehicle, a Citroën Berlingo. He appeared on CCTV footage in a change of dark clothing at the junction of Berryford Road and Finch Lane shortly before 4 p.m. Cameras captured him stood on the street corner with his face covered, peering over in the direction of Mr. Naylor's home before turning back in the opposite direction. Nee's van was no longer there. Unbeknown to Cashman, he had left the area around half an hour earlier and travelled back to Aintree Retail Park in order to visit Screwfix, a trip that may well have saved his life. Thomas Cashman had been out to shoot Joseph Nee dead, and while this first attempt had failed before it even really began, the assassin would be back. Cashman continued to keep tabs on Finch Lane. He took a total of 12 trips past Mr. Naylor's home in the afternoon and evening of August 22nd, moving between there, his brother's house only a few doors down on the opposite side of the street, his sister's, the homes of associates on Snowbury Road, as well as his own large detached new build on the Point Estate bordering West Derby Golf Club. Crucially, one such visit came only minutes after the match had kicked off. Nee's van was back on Finch Lane at this time, and his target was where Cashman wanted him. He briefly returned to his home on Grenadier Drive for 8 minutes before heading out again and parking his van up on Aspers Road. Dressed all in black and with his face covered, he continued on foot. For more than half an hour, Cashman waited outside silently with 2 loaded guns in his possession. Then, at 9:52 p.m, the game finished. His plan could now be put into action. Chapter 2. The Shooting. Nee was one of 5 friends who'd been watching the match at Timmy Naylor's house on the new TV in his bedroom while smoking weed. He left with Abraham shortly after full time. Suddenly, the 2 men heard a pair of bangs behind them. Abraham fled up an alleyway as Nee fell to the floor, having been struck in the midriff by a bullet fired from a 9mm self-loading pistol. Cashman bore down on the injured and helpless man, held out the firearm and prepared to fire what would be the final shot. His victim begged for his life. But fate smiled on Nee for a second time that day. The gun malfunctioned, possibly jamming due to a struggle. It gave him a few invaluable moments to get up and run for his life. Cashman, however, was undeterred, continuing his relentless pursuit as Nee fled towards the front door of the Korbel home, leaving a trail of blood behind him as he did so. Alarmed by the cracks of gunfire out in her street, Cheryl Korbel had gone outside to investigate. Spotting the opening to a hallway, Nee made a dash for what he must have seen as a potential sanctuary inside. The mum soon realised the danger she was in and hurried back inside, desperately attempting to shut the front door in a bid to keep that danger away from her family. Olivia, still not down for the night, became frightened and ran to the bottom of the stairs. As Nee tried to force his way in, Cashman fired again. His shot missed the intended target, instead hitting and passing through the door. This bullet, fired from the second backup weapon the gunman was carrying, struck Cheryl Korbel in the hand. Horrifically, it continued into Olivia's chest and became lodged in her left arm. Nee managed to barge his way inside past an injured Cheryl, but Cashman still was not done. A gloved hand brandishing the revolver came around the door. There was a flash and a bang as he fired once more. Thankfully, this shot did not cause any further injury, but the damage was done. Cheryl did not realise straight away that Olivia had been hurt. Then she turned around. She saw her critically injured daughter. Many would have crumbled at the sight, but Cheryl, seriously wounded though she was, summoned every ounce of strength she had left and tried to pick Olivia up and carry her upstairs and out of harm's way. But there was nothing she could do. It was immediately apparent to the first police officer to arrive at the scene how gravely injured Olivia was. She was rushed the short distance to Elder Hay Children's Hospital, but she was tragically pronounced dead at 11:24 p.m. Before the arrival of the emergency services, Nee managed to stumble his way out of the house before collapsing in the road. Nee was able to call for help and a group of associates raced him to Wiston Hospital's A&E department, later being transferred to Aintree Hospital. It is believed he spent months there, such were the severity of his injuries. Cashman, meanwhile, had made good his escape, vaulting walls and fences as he leapt through the back gardens of houses in the area to avoid the gaze of CCTV cameras and the public. Cashman had a specific destination in mind. Chapter 3. The Love Triangle. On the night Olivia was killed, Sarah had dozed off while reading a bedtime story to her children. Her name has been changed for this video as her identity cannot be publicised due to a court order. Around 2 hours later, she was woken by a man at her bedside. She felt a tap on her leg. It was Cashman seeking refuge in her family home after the shooting had gone wrong. He had no trousers on and had his head in his hands. Cashman was visibly distressed and nervous, mumbling that he had done Joey. Sarah had a history with her late-night visitor. She and Cashman had been having an affair behind the backs of their respective partners. He insisted that she keep the visitor secret, but against his wishes, she called her partner, a local man named Paul Russell. Her partner rushed around. At the doorstep, she heard the 2 men discussing Joey Nee. Upon his arrival, Russell was reported to have said to Cashman, "Don't want to hear it, don't tell me nothing." But in an apparent confession, Cashman told Russell what he had done. Russell then agreed to give Cashman a lift to a location away from the scene. Russell will get rid of these incriminating items by taking them to the house of a Cashman associate called Craig Byrne, after giving the would-be hitman a lift back to his van helping to cover for the very man who was secretly having sex with his girlfriend. The guns have never been found, although Sarah reported that her once lover told her he had dropped them off before arriving at her house. The next morning, she heard the news that left the city in despair and quickly put two and two together. When she heard Nee's name being reported in the media as the intended target of the shooting, she knew for sure. Chapter 4. Runcorn. Once back at his van, Cashman was on the move to Snowbury Road and the home of friend Nicky McHale. This was an address that doubled as his safe house for stashing cannabis. McHale would later be attacked in his own home after the trial after attempting to provide his friend with an alibi for the shooting. Cashman met a friend at this address and asked him for a lift. Instead of heading to his home in Grenadier Drive, however, he instructed his confused chauffeur to head around the corner to Mab Lane. The next leg in a tangled web of a journey saw him travel by bicycle to Playfield Walk, where his niece Bobby Bailey lived. It was her that eventually delivered Cashman home at around midnight in the Ford Fiesta which he had bought her when she passed her driving test. 2 nights later, he was on his way out of the city in his long-term partner's Land Rover Discovery. Cashman would later describe his trip with childhood sweetheart Kayleigh-Ann Sweeney as a chilled getaway while the kids were being looked after by family. It would not be an exotic holiday abroad, which would perhaps be par for the course for a man who, by his own admission, was raking in as much as £5,000 per week in dealing drugs. The destination wasn't to be Dubai, Ibiza or a city break in Amsterdam, nor was it even a comparatively modest trip to the Lake District or North Wales. Thomas Cashman was off for a staycation in Runcorn. Meanwhile, Merseyside police were well into the thick of one of the most high-profile investigations in the force's history. More than 800 intelligence logs were received during their inquiries, with Operation Robin having seen Cashman's movements on August 22nd painstakingly pieced together via an array of CCTV and Ring doorbell footage from around the Dovecote area. Cashman was back at the apartment in Runcorn with his friend John Wynne by the early hours of September 4, his 34th birthday. Shortly before 1 a.m, he had visitors. They were not there to wish him many happy returns. It was a flock of armed police there to arrest him. Cashman, inevitably, was not too happy. On September 6, after 2 days in custody, Cashman was released on conditional bail, triggering an extensive surveillance operation by the National Crime Agency, which had evidence Cashman was preparing to flee the country before he could face court. During this period, he sought to disrupt the investigation by changing his patterns, lifestyle and location to make evidence gathering more challenging. His house was then searched on September 14th when it was found with no electricity supply while every router, smoke alarm, CCTV monitor and cable from the rear of televisions in each room were disconnected. Cashman was arrested for a second time in late September and charged with Olivia's murder on the 1st of October. Chapter 5. The Trial. It was a love triangle and 2 specks of gunpowder on a pair of Under Armour tracksuit bottoms helped to prove that Thomas Cashman was the man who shot Olivia Korbel dead. The prosecution began with strong contextual evidence that showed Cashman casing the area over the course of the day, waiting for the right moment to strike. Cashman, however, claimed in his evidence that he had no involvement in the shooting and was counting £10,000 in cash and smoking a spliff at a friend's house. He had admitted being a high-level drug dealer who made up to £5,000 per week selling cannabis, and his various trips around the area throughout the day were apparently concerned with his involvement in the supply of the Class B substance. However, the Crown had 2 aces up their sleeve, a pair of star witnesses that would turn their backs on Cashman and deliver the decisive blow that would send him down for a very long time. From the witness box, the woman with whom Cashman had initially sought refuge with immediately after the shooting gave crucial evidence about the killer's movements in the hours after Olivia was murdered. Smart, fierce and scathing in her exchanges with Cashman's defense barrister, she gave the jury the killer's whereabouts the night of Olivia's murder, along with details of how he tried to cover it up, exploding his paper-thin alibi. She is believed to have had more death threats than any other police witness in Merseyside's history, and may face years in a witness protection program hidden away from family and friends. After just over 9 hours of deliberations, the jury gave their answer. Guilty. Guilty of Olivia's murder, guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, guilty of wounding Cheryl Korbel, guilty of possessing firearms with intent to endanger life. Whatever the reason for Cashman's catastrophic decision to try and take out Joseph Nee, we know that he was not willing to confront the devastation he brought to the Pratt-Korbel family. He was sentenced to serve a minimum of 42 years in prison, a term considerably higher than other Gangland murders, but a reflection of the incomprehensible level of carelessness that had led to the death of an innocent child. Time will tell if the witness statements given in court could prove a turning point in the fight against organised crime, breaking down the code of silence that exists in some parts of the community. The significant sentence given to Cashman, coupled with the togetherness and bravery of the witnesses, will no doubt leave a mark on the city, and hopefully reduce the likelihood of a tragedy like this occurring ever again.